The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 27, verses 51 to 56. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Now when the centurion and they that were with him, watching Jesus, saw the earthquake, and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying, Truly, this was the Son of God. And many women were there, beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him, among which was Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's children. There endeth our reading. Thank you, Lord. Amen. In today's short reading from chapter 27 to Matthew, we are witness to the events that occurred immediately after Jesus gave up the ghost on the cross, which was in verse 50 from yesterday's reading. And I'll just read that here. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. The last hours of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, on the cross differ very, very slightly between Mark and Matthew, and then there's a bit more variance in Luke and John, with other statements made by Jesus recorded in those two Gospels, and we'll be covering those in the rest of the Gospel year. John in summer and early autumn, and Luke in late autumn and through to December the 31st. The Gospels of Matthew and Mark are quite similar in terms of the events occurring directly after Jesus gave up the ghost. We see here in Matthew, in verse 51, Behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. Now this would be referring to a very thick, dense, essentially a tapestry that was woven from many threads, which would separate in the very inner sanctum of the temple the most holy place from the holy place. Now, the holy place was only accessible to the priests, and only the chief priest was allowed to enter the most holy place behind this tapestry, and only then. It was once a year on the Day of Atonement, and only when he had the correct sacrificial blood with him that he would scatter within that most holy place. In ancient times it would have contained the Ark of the Covenant. Since the return from Babylon, I think there was a massive rock there in its place commemorating the ark. This veil was said to be huge, so tens of feet in height and in width, suspended from a lintel, a stone lintel. So this is not something like a silken or cotton veil. This is something almost more akin to a tapestry. And we read here that it was torn from the top to the bottom after Jesus died. And symbolically, of course, what that signifies is the New Testament, the New Covenant. As one commentator put it, and I'm just repeating this, not wishing to offend any Jewish listeners, but as one commentator put it, that rendered the most holy place as a place akin to every other square foot of Judea, that the in the New Testament, now it was the gospel, the revolutionary message of including all in the love of brethren, that was the relationship between God and mankind. Now, only in Matthew do we then have, and the earth did quake and the rocks rent, so signifying some form of violent earth tremor, which is not unusual in that particular part of the world. We remember that from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, which corresponds to noon to 3 p.m. in the afternoon, that the sun was darkened, and this could not be accounted for by an eclipse. And that may have some meteorological or geological significance along with this violent earth tremor. And that's something that those expert in earthquakes and natural disasters might attest to, whether you tend to get changes in the light and such accompanying earthquakes. It's certainly true that animals seem to know ahead of time when earthquakes are going to occur, and whether that might be signified by a difference in the light is not clear. And again, only in Matthew here we have that this violent earth tremor or very small earthquake caused graves to open in the vicinity of Jerusalem, and then many bodies of the saints which slept arose. And so here we have essentially tombs being sort of created, openings created in the tombs by this violent earth tremor, and bodies of saints being disturbed. And after the resurrection of Jesus, which occurred 2 days later on the Sabbath, that these spirits of these saints were seen in the holy city and appeared unto many. And so presumably in the time of Matthew there would be living witnesses to that who would attest to that. Now there's quite some discussion amongst commentators who were these saints. I think according to tradition, and tradition tends to be less than accurate in many cases in corresponding to the Gospels. According to tradition, these were some of the giant figures from the Jewish history, such as Abraham and Jacob and such, which commentators, I think, probably rightly question. Another idea is that these may have been converts to Christianity during the ministry of Jesus who had passed away. There would be such people, and they would be referred to as saints because these were really the first of the resurrected within the New Testament. Some speak of, for example, John the Baptist would be another idea, although it's unlikely that he would be buried in the vicinity of Jerusalem. Now, we then sort of return in verse 54 to a narrative that then recoincides with Mark and the centurion. Now, a centurion would be a Roman soldier who would have authority over roughly 100 soldiers. So a senior Roman soldier, and there was a centurion apparently on guard at the crucifixion site, just overseeing those Roman soldiers whose job it was to make sure that nobody interfered with the execution. This centurion and they that were with him, so possibly the other Roman soldiers or just onlookers, witnessing Jesus, witnessing the earth tremor, perhaps witnessing some of the tombs being wrenched open, were greatly afraid, and are quoted as saying, "Truly this was the Son of God." They would be afraid given the treatment that Jesus had received from the Roman soldiers after the sentence was passed. His First of all, having been scourged by the Roman soldiers prior to the sentence, and then afterwards being mocked in the praetorium, the crown of thorns, the crucifixion itself, of course, they would fear greatly, fearing some form of divine retribution. Now, commentators point out that it would not be common for a Roman soldier to use the phrase Son of God. The Romans generally were polytheists and so would think of many gods, and it's possible that a polytheist would say truly this was a son of a god. Alternatively, it's also possible that this centurion, having served in the Holy Land, was a proselyte, so a Gentile converted to Judaism, and there were such, and in that case it would be quite a natural thing for him to say. In any case, a quotation with its own beauty, because in a sense that centurion, a Gentile, being cognizant of the divinity of Jesus expiring on the cross, and in a sense one of the very first Gentile witnesses to the New Testament following the death of Jesus. And then in this short reading, Matthew sort of, like a filmmaker would swing the camera around from the cross and the Roman soldiers looking on, probably trembling and frightened, swinging the camera around to where the onlookers are, and probably kept back from the cross. And we're told that there were many women there, beholding everything that occurred, faithful to Jesus, which had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him and his disciples. And these women are mentioned in different parts of the four Gospels. Primary amongst them always is Mary Magdalene, and we have mentioned Mary before. She healed of an affliction with 7 devils by Jesus, we learn from one of the Gospels, and almost certainly her name signifying that she was of the town of Magdala on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. The identity of Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, is really quite complicated actually, and I've tried to get to the bottom of this, but I don't think that there is a unique answer. I won't go through all of the different theories and permutations in this reading today. Suffice to say that both Matthew and Mark refer to the same 3 women here. Mary Magdalene, the mother of Zebedee's children, who we know from other parts of the Gospel is Salome, not to be confused with the Salome, sometimes the name given to the daughter of Herodias, who danced for Herod Antipas in that fateful evening when John the Baptist was beheaded. But here the mother of James and John the fishermen, the 3rd and 4th apostles that were recruited by Jesus. And then they refer to Mary, mother of James and Joseph. Now, what makes this slightly confusing is that James and Joseph are mentioned as brethren of Christ, and we've had this discussion before earlier in the Gospel year, and we will be having it again because this is something that comes up in Luke and John. Were these amongst the disciples, or were they literally brothers of Jesus, in which case Mary here would be the Virgin Mary, although many think that that's not the case. In fact, most commentators think that's not the case. This person is also referred to as and this is really in John, Mary, wife of Cleophas, who's also referred to as Jesus' mother's sister. And this would make James and Joseph the cousins of Jesus, and that's, I think, probably the most common belief amongst commentators, is that James and Joseph were cousins of Jesus, and we've heard in the Gospel earlier on of the brethren of Jesus, and that's believed really to be more like either stepbrothers or cousins. The confusion here just goes on because it really concerns also different belief systems within Christianity. So within Catholicism, there's an idea that the mother of Jesus, Mary, had no other children, that she was an eternal virgin. Other denominations believe that she may have had children, in which case Jesus may truly have had actual brothers through his mother Mary. Again, they wouldn't be full brothers because of the Immaculate Conception. So the complexities are actually quite deep here. As to whether James and Joseph were disciples, for example, is James here James the Less, often associated as with the second James in the 12 disciples, who's often referred to as James, son of Alphaeus. And you can see why this gets so complicated, because then you have to start connecting all of these different names together. So is James the Less the same as James, son of Alphaeus? And is that name Alphaeus then connected with the family of Jesus through his mother, whether through her sister, and so on? And things just get more and more complicated. I think the simplest reading, at least from Mark and Matthew, is that James and Joseph were disciples of Jesus, but not amongst the 12 apostles. They were brethren, probably cousins, who at first did not believe in his divine nature, because we know from the Gospels that Jesus complained that even within his own kin a prophet is not without honour, which implies that originally the family of Jesus did not support the idea of his divine nature. But I think those brethren would have quickly changed their belief in seeing miracles that were being performed by Jesus and the growing fame of Jesus throughout Galilee. And therefore Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, then being related to the Virgin Mary, possibly her sister or her sister-in-law, possibly, maybe could be a sister of Joseph. So these are all possibilities. I think what's actually more important and more interesting, and possibly also more controversial, is the presence or not of the mother of Jesus at the cross. Because the mother of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, is actually not mentioned in the crucifixion scene in Mark or Matthew, and neither is she mentioned in Luke. So the three synoptic Gospels do not mention the Virgin Mary at the site of the crucifixion. She's only mentioned, and she's mentioned very strongly in the Gospel of John, as being actually directly at the foot of the cross, accompanied by one of the disciples who people believe is John, the brother of James. Now, I would say all commentators that I've read believe that the mother of Jesus was present at the foot of the cross, but that we have to recognize that's essentially saying that that's taken purely from one gospel, the Gospel of John, and it's actually in a way sort of ignoring the very obvious absence of mention of her in the synoptic Gospels. I don't have a strong view on this, but I think it's very important that we do point out that these synoptic Gospels make no mention of the mother of Jesus at the site of crucifixion. And we'll note that for now, and when we cover this crucifixion scene in the Gospel of John, and that will be coming in the mid to late autumn, we can revisit this question more carefully. And so that's just an attempt to make some sense of these many Marys and many Jameses that occur in the Gospels. I think, though, the most important woman to take note of in verse 56 is Mary Magdalene, because of the subsequent occurrences regarding the resurrection.